I acknowledge the sovereign First Peoples of the land on waters on which we meet, the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and their emerging leaders, and their descendants who have cared for this place since time immemorial. I also pay my respects to all First Peoples who are gathered with us today, and particularly members of the UAICC. It's wonderful to be in communion and covenant together. I'd like to say thank you to the Reverend Gary Dronefield, who finished as President of the Uniting Aboriginal and Islander Christian Congress last year. I also acknowledge Pastor Mark Kickett, who is currently serving as the Interim National Chair of Congress. Thank you, Mark, for your ongoing ministry with us, and again, it's a joy to be serving with you in national leadership of our church. I also want to acknowledge significant Congress leaders who have passed away since our last Synod meeting. Josie Hanson, Reverend Dorothy Harris-Gordon, Reverend Jeffrey Garawarra, Reverend Seelan Garlett, Pastor Bill Hollingsworth, and Auntie Kathy Carter, who we farewelled only last week. My condolences to all of you here, particularly in South Australia, with the passing of Auntie Kathy. We are grateful for their service to Christ and the life and ministry of the Uniting Church. 2020 was a year of disruptive and enormous change for the world, for our country and for our church. And it seems that 2021 is continuing in the same vein. The COVID-19 pandemic has seen communities and people isolated, and governments working tirelessly to respond to this crisis. Health, community services and caregivers have stepped up in remarkable ways to ensure that people receive the best possible care and support. The pandemic has caused loss, anxiety and distress across our communities and across our world. As the Uniting Church, we have been advocating for those in greatest need. Churches, including ours, have taken up new ways of working and worshipping. Ministers, pastors, worship leaders and church members have continued to pastorally care for congregations and the communities around them, and to bring God's light and hope to all those places. The Uniting Church is a multicultural church, and this year, 2021, we mark 36 years since we declared we are a multicultural church. Today, our church is enriched and enlivened by the 13 national conferences representing cultural groups that are part of the Uniting Church. I have the privilege of meeting regularly with the national conference chairs. This is a meeting we had online, sharing together our concerns, our challenges, our joys and our hopes. And this has encouraged and strengthened us in our mission and ministry together. As the Uniting Church, we are committed to living God's call for justice, peace and the renewal of the whole creation. The bushfires that swept across our country from late 2019 and into 2020, bushfires that have profoundly affected a number of members of our Synod, highlighted again for us the reality of climate change and our responsibility to advocate for the care of our planet. In August 2020, the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, they'd won the Nobel Prize for their work, and the Uniting Church hosted an interfaith service on the anniversary of the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Last month, I was delighted to join ICAN again in celebrating the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Our connections with our global partners continue to be a great source of inspiration for us as a church. And last year, we were blessed by financial support from our Pacific partners to the National Disaster Relief Fund for responses to the bushfires. And in December, Uniting World began an appeal to help repair the damage of tropical cyclone Yasa. And some of you may know that another cyclone has come through and devastated Fiji again. While many global meetings have had to be cancelled or postponed, the worldwide church continues to gather online and to work together. In January, the Assembly Standing Committee made the decision that the 16th Assembly in July will be online for a shortened duration, on the weekend of July the 17th and the 18th, with a view to a reconvened face-to-face 16th Assembly in 2022. Throughout 2020, the Assembly has adapted to working remotely, as well as providing resources and information helpful for our church. For 2 months, weekly national worship was live-streamed on the Uniting Church in Australia Facebook page every Sunday, providing an opportunity for a range of ministers in the church to offer leadership nationally and for our members to experience the creativity and diversity of our church. In April 2020, the Assembly Standing Committee approved the online gathering for worship with Holy Communion for those congregations that wished to provide this. This approval is in place until the end of June 2021. Once the full impacts of COVID-19 were apparent, the Assembly engaged widely on justice issues through making submissions to the federal government and joining in other campaigns. In particular, this involved advocacy on the job seeker and job keeper support packages, the need for services supporting people in family and domestic violence, the plight of refugees and asylum seekers, and those on temporary visas, including international students, most of whom were and remain ineligible for any support. We've also considered advocacy for a post-COVID world in the document Build Back Better, a post-COVID-19 vision for a just Australia, and I commend it to you. We've also been part of the End COVID for All campaign through Uniting World with a coalition of development agencies, advocating for equitable access to the COVID vaccine for countries particularly in the Pacific and Asia regions. Uniting World held online conversations with Pacific Church partners during this time. The Assembly Resourcing Unit has held a series of webinars on COVID-19 and the multicultural church, and there have been regular opportunities to catch up with our national consultants over coffee online to keep connections strong within the context of isolation. In 2020, the National Safe Church Unit launched the principles of a child-safe uniting church. These principles provide a foundation to support the growth of a child-safe culture across the life of our church as we continue our commitment to provide a safe place for all vulnerable people. The Assembly has launched a new website, uniting.church. I commend it to you. And we've moved our Sydney office after 33 years of being at 222 Pitt Street. We're now in new offices in Pilgrim House, appropriately named, just up the street at 262 Pitt Street. I also draw your attention to the written report that we have provided, which gives you links to the work of the Assembly agencies, initiatives and other bodies connected to the Assembly. To conclude this report, I bring you a few updates. During the past year, I have met regularly with moderators to reflect and pray with them and to collaborate in providing pastoral support and resources for our church. The National Leadership Group of the Church, which includes Assembly officers, moderators and General Secretaries, continue to connect and work together, particularly in the context of the pandemic. Thank you, Bronte, for your ongoing ministry as moderator. Thank you for your generosity to me as President. It's been great to have conversations with you. And thank you to the General Secretary, Felicity Amory, for your service to this Synod and also your participation in the Assembly Standing Committee. We thank Reverend Rob Brown for his membership and contribution to the ASC and Reverend Emil Mannion for chairing the South Sudanese National Conference. I also want to thank our Defence Force chaplains, at least Robin's here today. Would you like to stand up, the Defence Force chaplains who are here? Thank you, Robin. We also give thanks for the Bush chaplains, Sonny, Julia and Gary. Are they here? I can see Sonny in his Frontier Services shirt. You'll notice I was wearing a Frontier Services mask earlier. Thank you also to my EA, Neryl McCullum, who's based here in Adelaide. Thank you to Ian Dempster for your administrative support of the Congress, and those of you who are working in national disaster recovery, who work in collaboration with Stephen Robinson. Thank you also to members of this Synod who are members of the Assembly, who serve on Assembly boards, national task groups, and are engaging with our wider circles of interest. My President's Conference, which was to be held in October 2020, has been postponed until the 29th of April to May the 2nd, 2021. It's due to be held here in Adelaide at UCA, and you're all welcome to sign up and come, obviously within a COVID-safe environment. As an introduction to the theme of the conference, Called by God, I hosted a webinar late last year on the themes Called by God, Every Member Ministry, and Living Our Christian Vocation. The recording of this webinar is available on the Uniting Church in Australia Vimeo channel. Again, I commend that to you. We also had to cancel NYALC, National Young Adult Leaders Conference, which was to be held in January 2021 at Nanyara. I've instead hosted NYALC online. We've held 4 of these video conferences with the young adults of our church. I reported to you last time we met that I would be meeting with youth and young adults in a series of President's Roundtables to hear their voices around a series of key areas and questions regarding their journey with Christ, their experiences and view of the Uniting Church, and how they would like to see us engage in the public space. I've held 6 of these roundtables, including 2 here in South Australia, and plan to re-engage with this when it's safe to gather again. I've heard from various people engaged in ministry about the weariness that they are feeling as the COVID-19 safety measures continue. And they adapt amazingly and creatively to the changing landscape that can vary from day to day, as we know. We're also concerned as the church with the mental health of our communities. It's important that we continue to build on the strength of our connection with one another across Australia. We are a national church and have local expressions right across the country. We need to support one another, focusing on the vision of who we are called to be as the body of Christ and our participation in God's liberating mission in the world. I hope that we will be generous toward each other, patient and open to the possibilities of the transformation and new creation that God is doing among us. We will not get it right all the time, but we are sent by Christ, who goes with us and gives us good companions for the journey, including all of us gathered here today. And as our basis of union reminds us, God gives us the gift of the Holy Spirit in order that we may not lose the way. Thank you, Moderator, General Secretary and members of Synod. May God continue to bless us with courage and hope to be the people of God.
And thank you, President. If anybody has any quick questions, we've got time for a couple. If there's something you want to ask about what out of the written report or what Deirdre said today or any other work of the Assembly. Come to the microphone now if you've... there's someone coming. There are 2 coming. Yeah, please state your name and your appointing body and then your question. Thanks.
Thank you, Moderator. Kerry Wilson from Synod Business Committee.
I'm sorry, I don't think that microphone's on. Just we wait for the tech guys to...
Hello? Hello?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Moderator. Kerry Wilson, appointed by a Synod Business Committee. My question is, what has come out of those discussions that you've had with young people? Like, what are the results? What's coming up, moving ahead? If that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Kerry. And I am still gathering together some of the responses. I think, you know, what people value about the Uniting Church, our formation in discipleship, the equality of women and men, the way children and young people have a voice in the life of their church and are considered members of today, not just into the future, our deep commitment to social justice, our concerns about care for the environment and God's creation. There's quite a bit of concern around the mental health of our communities, particularly in isolation, and some of the young adults we connected with were in Melbourne in hard lockdown, and they expressed concerns about concern for that, and they were actively engaged in seeking to address that themselves. The joy of intergenerational community and how they were supporting one another and older members of the community. I think that's a number of what I remember. I'm happy to talk to you more about it, but yes, that's just some of the things that are emerging.
Thank you.
Alison Wish, Unley Uniting Church. Deirdre, you didn't say anything about Act 2. Did you mean to?
Thank you, Alison. And that wasn't one of those Dorothy Dix questions that they have in Parliament question time. Thank you, Alison. So Act 2 is a project currently that the Assembly Standing Committee have got underway, and some of you have been part of those conversations. So there's a task group appointed by the ASC, including myself, President-elect and the General Secretary, and a number of members of the Assembly Standing Committee. And it's about Act 2. Here we are in Act 1 as the Uniting Church. What's our future? We're asking questions about what are the challenges that we're facing in this time? What are the strengths of our church that are going to address those challenges? And what do we need to pay attention to in the next 5 years? And so that's the conversations we're having. There is a survey online that we would love you to fill out. If you go to the Assembly website, you'll see Act 2 right there. You press it and you connect with the survey. If you find the survey difficult, do it with a friend, do it with a group. So groups or individuals can fill it out. We've just finished 5 online conversations with members of the Uniting Church, and we will be meeting as a task group to decide how we continue to roll it out. So it'll be a process that continues to the Assembly next year and beyond into the next Assembly. So it's about our life together and how we move forward together.
Thank you very much, and thank you for sharing your work and the work of the Assembly, and doubling up for Colleen as well. And it must be very challenging to be the president of a national body when for however many months you couldn't leave your hometown, let alone your home state and Synod.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that, Moderator. I've said to a few people, I was never grounded as a teenager, so now I've got that experience in my fixing.
Thank you, Deirdre. And we now then move on to the Standing Committee report, and after the worker does the work, to the General Secretary to give the Standing Committee report. Thank you.
Thank you, Moderator, and thank you, Benji. Members of Synod, I rise to present to you the report of the Synod Standing Committee. And I want to begin by saying that I think that probably the Synod Standing Committee was one of the more challenging spaces in 2020 for me. The moderator's admirable and persistent commitment to achieving Uniting Church decision-making processes. The challenges that we experienced in experimenting and adjusting to the rapidly changing capacity of MS teams, a task that would not have been successful without the gifts and expertise of our IT&T team, and indeed the patient persistence and dogged determination of Tracy Bost. While all of this was happening around us, without that assistance, we may not have been successful at all. We are very grateful that the members of the Synod Standing Committee had met face-to-face in both December and February. However, these meetings did not prepare the Standing Committee for what was to come. As the minutes attest, Synod Standing Committee moved to more regular meetings, 2 in April, 2 in May, 1 in each of June, July, August, September and November. And members of the Standing Committee will tell you that that was not what they signed up for. To encourage community building, we continued to meet in small working groups prior to our meetings. We experimented with a variety of voting methods but determined not to address some matters of business before the Synod Standing Committee while restricted by online meetings. Some examples of that were that we were challenged to think about how we might address the bylaws and modifications to the bylaws. There were challenges around a conversation that the Church needs to have in relation to ministry of pastor. That too was difficult. There are a number of issues of governance before the Church at this time, particularly in relation to our organisations. They are difficult conversations to have online. I want to begin my report by thanking the members of the Standing Committee. And it's becoming a bit of a routine, I know, but can I encourage the members of the Standing Committee to stand? Not going to, yes, they are being very brave. It's been a very challenging time and we thank you. In December, immediately post-Synod 2019, the reports to the Synod Standing Committee reflected ministry centres with energy and anticipation getting set up for the new year. Changes to boards and committees, some governance which would become a recurring theme for the year, continuing support for presbyteries and the beginning of a strategic planning process were part of what the Standing Committee sought to address. By February, we were in the tragic landscape of bushfires. And the work of supporting newly established presbyteries continued. By April, we were in lockdown. The first meeting affirmed the work of the crisis management team, attempted to approve our revised bylaws, and the changing financial landscape was emerging. We noted significant changes in the leadership team of UAICC in South Australia. We affirmed the placement of the Reverend Professor Andrew Dutney. At our second meeting in April, no formal reports were received. We endorsed the name of Presbytery of Southern SA, and decisions were made to direct all the Uniting Foundation money available to supporting congregations deal with and respond to COVID-19. In May, the work of the emergency relief centres was discussed and affirmed, indeed strongly affirmed, and the Synod may wish to offer some applause to those communities and congregations that have worked tirelessly through through this time at emergency relief centres in order to meet the needs of the disadvantaged in our community. The concept of creating an Indigenous theologian in residence was discussed, and Placements Committee was requested to put all placements on hold. A special meeting in May was called to appoint Bridget Ransom as the new Executive Officer for the engagement team, and we welcome Bridget to her first Synod meeting with us here in South Australia. By June, we are all starting to think that face-to-face meetings might be possible this side or that side, I'm now a bit confused, but of Christmas 2020. But with an increase from 4 to 9 people on the screen for MS Teams, we continue to persevere with using that technology. The Synod Standing Committee determined to change the date of the annual meeting to February 2021. There was a comprehensive report on UAICC SA ministry centres. We approved the adoption of the 2019 financial statements, and the Strategic Planning Working Group had restarted its work. Still on MS Teams, the July meeting arrived. I reported that the moderator and I had almost completed a Synod road trip, which is a wonderful opportunity to visit congregations, share stories of the life and witness of the Church. Thank you to those congregations that we visited for your hospitality, your generosity, and every now and again there was a cup of tea. Not because the tea wasn't on offer. It was just problematic in that context. It was reported that the Resources Board would provide some short-term financial assistance for congregations significantly affected by COVID. The Synod Office Climate Survey report was complete, and the approval of the second ministry placement for Noarlunga Parish Mission funded through the new Church and Mission Development Fund was approved. In August, we attempted a face-to-face meeting with most members of the Synod Standing Committee present in the boardroom. The Associate General Secretary report included some congregational closures. We explored a little further the bylaws, approved a revised budget forecast, heard about the Ministry of Pastor Training and some national collaboration in the safe church space. In September, Matt Wilson attended to discuss the draft property review discussion paper. There was further discussion about the Synod meeting and membership. We discussed the draft governance resource from the National Safe Church Unit, and the Uniting Care continue to facilitate some discussion around matters of governance and our organisations. Bylaws continue to be a theme, this time in relation to mission leadership and to the Mission Leadership Development Board and its work. While the minutes of the November meeting are still in draft form, the meeting was somewhat dominated by some pressing issues coming from the Uniting Care report, including emergency relief centres, a presentation regarding our future relationship with Pilgrim School, the constitution of Padare Christian College, board appointments and, again, matters of governance. The Resources Board was pleased to report that there would likely be a surplus thanks to JobKeeper, and that we should consider 2020 and 2021 as the pandemic period, a period of 24 months, which would result in a small deficit. UAICC SA had submitted a draft budget, placements and Safe Church reported and included appointments to the disciplinary committees. The dates of the meetings for 2021 have been set, and indeed they look slightly normal. in that there are only 4. Watch this space. Given the year that we have had, we're prepared for anything. However, it is our hope that the new Synod Standing Committee will have a clear run, attending to some of the more urgent matters and picking up the requests that will inevitably come from this, our annual meeting. Thank you to those who continue to serve through the Synod Standing Committee, and indeed for those who have slightly courageously offered their nomination for the Standing Committee for 2021. Moderator, that concludes my report, my very brief run-through of some of the matters that were before the Standing Committee during this period of time, and I welcome any questions that members of Synod have.
Thank you, General Secretary. I do invite any questions on the operations and decisions of Standing Committee to be brought to the microphone now if you have a question. Thank you, Les.
I'm Les Underwood. I'm from Uniting SA. This is a matter that concerns me with regard to process of the Standing Committee. It becomes all the more urgent because if we are considering going from annual to 18-month sessions of Synod, it becomes even more important that the business of the Synod in between Synod meetings is able to be conducted in a timely and appropriate way by the Standing Committee. My concern that causes me to raise this has to do with a request from Uniting Wesley Bowden regarding their request to amend the Constitution. Conversation about this took place in July 2019. A proposal was presented in time for the for the Synod in that year. Time ran out and it was referred to the Standing Committee. The Standing Committee, in a document which sets out the Uniting Care Wesley Bowden request for amended constitution, sets out a process that they went through. At this point in time, 18 months later, these people still do not have a decision to their request. Throughout the last year with COVID, there have been an enormous amount of complex situations arise for us as the Church and for organisations and other bodies in being able to respond appropriately to the demands of governments and also of people for whom we have a responsibility. It would seem to me, from reading this document, that the Standing Committee was unable to make a yes or no response to this question, and it would seem to me from a comment that says that the task group was set up largely with the question of how to strengthen relationships with agencies and organisations. One of the conclusions of that was, it is the preference of the Standing Committee that the Synod continue to be the appointing authority for organisations where possible. I don't know where the preference things come in and what where possible means. So
okay, excuse me, Les, yeah? You've reached your time. Is there a question that you have out of this?
I will give you the question. I would request and ask that the Secretary of the Synod be invited to have a small committee to look at guidelines for the Standing Committee to be able to process such requests in a respectful and timely manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Les. Would you like to?
Thank you, Moderator. Thank you, Les, for your question. Les, can I begin by expressing an apology to Wesley Bowden and indeed to members of Synod. It is an inappropriate amount of time, length of time, for the Synod Standing Committee to hold open such an important question for an organisation such as Wesley Bowden. Members of Synod will know that you have a report before you in relation to this matter, and it became very clear early in 2020 that this was a difficult discussion to have when people were working online. I want to reassure the members of Synod that the Standing Committee did receive a submission from Wesley Bowden, and we indeed invited Wesley Bowden to attend a meeting and to report to us about the issues in relation to the proposal that was before us. But it is true that there has been no resolution thus far to their request. I would welcome a proposal from the floor to encourage some action on that part as part of that process, but I would encourage us as a Synod to hear from the Executive Officer Uniting Care when he presents the proposal that's before us as part of our deliberations, and that we would, Moderator, not receive that proposal till, in fact, Tim has had an opportunity to present the proposal that's before us and to determine whether or not the House feels able to address the issue before us. But I would be very happy to take a procedural motion after that if that becomes necessary.
Thank you. Are there any other questions about Standing Committee? Well, thank you, General Secretary, for your both written and verbal report. We now come to general proposals, and this is now for decision. We would I invite Kate Baker, and it's now Shelley Alexander instead of Wendy Pryor, to come and talk to proposal number 12, continuity of pastoral care in aged care, which is proposal number 12 in your papers. And I invite Shelley and Kate to speak to that